Luke, let's start here. You currently cover Clemson football, and recruiting has been at the center of the college football world. June has become maybe the biggest month outside of December for recruiting headlines, guys committing, getting those verbal pledges in. So, walk me through the state of Clemson recruiting right now, and specifically what's been so exciting about these last 2 months or so.
Yeah, some of the most exciting parts for Clemson are the 2024 class. They've been able to, get out to a good start at some positions that they really needed to hit on in the 2024 cycle. So we're looking at spots like wide receiver, spots like safety potentially, now having a couple of 4 stars committed. So it's looking at in the future, what are your positions of need going to be in roster management? Clemson's been able to execute on that. And then also in the 2025 class, they've had this run of 2024s in June, which is similar to what they did last year. They like their one official visit weekend, which is a bold move because they put all their OVs in the summer on one weekend instead of spreading them out. But they do it, and it's been successful. Last year, June run of commitments. This year, another June run. And you take a look at a couple of receivers coming in, Bryant Wesco being one of them, and TJ Moore. There's some big names, some top 100 names involved. So for the Tigers, their strategy, it seems like at times, we talked about this last time, feels like sometimes they play with one hand behind their back. They don't have to do the things they do in terms of just one OV weekend. You could have done several and hosted a lot more guys or done things differently. But they go by the Clemson way, and it's been working. And even sometimes we start to think, well, maybe this isn't going to work this year, and they've pulled it off in the 24 class. In the 25 class, they've been able to fortify a little bit of the basis and the origins of that offensive group. So they've got a top 100 running back committed, 4-star quarterback. So with those two, they can build around them. They've got their anchors ready. So it's encouraging in the 24 class, but the 25 class, they've got some commitments that are earlier in the cycle than we're used to seeing and came within a month of them really picking up the Clemson offer.
Yeah, and what's so interesting about that, the 24 class, this is the time that guys are inking commits. But like you said, the 2025 class, this is early by any standards to have, 1, 2, let alone a couple of guys committing. And I think, that opens up a broader line of questioning that I have about Clemson. And you and I have talked about this off the air before. Dabo Sweeney has such a unique kind of approach to the game, right? And whether it be NIL or the transfer portal or just how he does recruiting, I think you have to start with here in 2023. What kind of is the temperature on Dabo, and where do Clemson fans feel like they're positioned as they try and climb that mountain to knock off a team like Georgia?
Right. Well, obviously at Clemson, the attitude is, hey, it hasn't been good enough the past couple of years, not making the college football playoff. Like the best is the standard is still kind of a thing at Clemson. So understanding, you really got to win the conference, which they did last year, but you've got to get into the playoff picture again. And now recruiting, the biggest thing, I think the biggest reason fans follow it, the biggest reason we follow it, it gives you hope. It helps you envision a future. It helps you say, hey, these are some high ceiling types of guys that are coming into the program. So because of the recruiting momentum and the June run really solidifying the fact that Clemson's recruiting is always going to be either in the top 10 or in the discussion to be top 10. And that's where it is right now. Even after a couple of years that weren't up to their standard, they're still there. They're still recruiting. They've still got these master guys like Mickey Kahn that goes all over Georgia and picks up 4 stars every year. They've got 6 commits already from Georgia in the 24 class. And then guys like Nick Eason that pretty much get their pick of defensive linemen, Lemansky Hall, edge guys with him, that little dynamic duo of those two guys. So because of that, they've continued to recruit. They've continued to say, okay, the offense wasn't good enough. Get the new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. So right now it's the understanding that, sure, they haven't been where they can be, but they've done what they need to do to give themselves the opportunity to get back. And there's the thought this year that, hey, if Klubnik is good, if Riley is good, Clemson's back. They win the ACC. They, take out Florida State, and I think it's week 4. Everyone's got that one circled.
Oh, yeah.
So, if Clemson's firing on all cylinders, then they take care of Florida State, they go through the ACC, and then they're back. So there's the chance right now that you can realistically, as a Clemson fan that's not wishing for too much, you can say, okay, I see the future. I see where it's going. And if not, the 24 class is going to bring in a new group of playmakers, a new group of defensive backs to help replenish a couple of positions. So there's the chance that, hey, Clemson's still within striking distance. That's how it feels.
And, I feel like folks have overreacted over the last couple of years, right? It hasn't been up to the standard of making a national championship or even making the college football playoff, but at least nationally, someone sitting in the central time zone, I've watched Clemson and gone, yeah, last year their offense stunk, like straight up, it did. But if your down season is 10-2 and an ACC championship, and listen, the Orange Bowl happened, I get that. It is what it is. But still, that floor, raising that floor to such a level where recruits never experience a true dip, right? A true rebuild, I think is so important to this discussion of the balance of power. Programs like Clemson might fade out of the foreground, but they don't leave the stage completely. And so while you have teams like Georgia, like Ohio State, now USC coming back to prominence, I feel like Alabama's in a very similar, maybe entering a similar arc, right? Where all of a sudden they're not contending for that national championship. At least they didn't last year. And they didn't look all that impressive at times on offense or on defense. Yet it seems like there's a little bit of an oligarchy going on where the main programs still run college football. My question to you is, one, do you feel like that's still true, that the Blue Bloods are still the only contenders for a national title? And, then if so, or if not, is the transfer portal NIL providing new paths for more competition around the league?
So loaded question here with what
Very.
you're going at. And no problem with that. When you look at these teams in college football, you're going to see programs like Clemson have to say, okay, if we want to stay at the top, we have to change. And they've begun making changes. I've been around some NIL conversations at Clemson that they weren't having a couple of years ago, for example. There's things that are starting at Clemson of saying, hey, we've got to get into the NIL business. And Coach Sweeney, it seems like, has kind of understood that as well with what's happened and saying, hey, what could happen if we stay out of this race? It doesn't look great. And, when you look at, the athletic director, Graham Neff, he's a younger guy. He gets it. They're promoting that. So for these blue blood programs, a lot of them, even if it's slowly, like Clemson, they've started to shift into this era of the NIL, the transfer portal, and understanding how they can use that to their benefit and also keeping their culture or keeping a semblance of their culture. So we're seeing things like this year, Clemson didn't have the scholarship spots. There's still one spot over, so they couldn't have portaled this year. But next year, I think we could see Clemson look at it. They did target at least one player that I heard of in the portal this year, but weren't able to get that done. So we're looking at those programs adapting. Alabama, of course, figuring out how to use transfers to get their offense bolstered, and that's helped them. But also around the league, we're looking at some of the teams, like you look at Kent State, their best players are getting taken elsewhere. Other programs are taking them. And a lot of the programs that are getting those kinds of players are ones that are trying to step up toward the top. Some guys, like I've heard from coaches that have talked to coaches at a school like Western Kentucky, and they understand that, sure, their players are probably, when they go on and they're all conference, they're going to take a look at the portal.
Yeah.
And the understanding from that is that it may not be a school like Alabama or Georgia that's taking the mid-major guys, but some of the ones that are the tier below or in that mid conference level will go and snag those guys. Like Penn State got a couple of really good ones out of the portal from some of the smaller Division I schools, and that helps them try to claw and compete to reshape the balance of their conference with Michigan and Ohio State and add depth. So we're seeing that we had that blue blood kind of feeling with Alabama Clemson, back and forth for a few years in the mid to late 2010s. And
Mm-hmm.
now I think we're getting a chance at other teams, like we saw Tennessee this past year, coming within striking distance because of a transfer quarterback and some position where they're able to add talent. So those things to me say, I think, yes, it benefits the very top, but it also can benefit the next 3 or 4 teams in the conference that can add a little depth, a little more parity, a little more to those big Power 5 conference and those teams. So that's what
Sure.
I'm seeing a lot of those types of schools rating the smaller school rosters and being able to use that to bolster the depth to close the gap with the top.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's ever going to be a perfect solution to kind of protect some of the smaller schools other than having guys like a Malachi Corley at Western Kentucky who just decides to stay, right? Just decides to play for the Hilltoppers for another season. And we as fans who, love the game of college football, not just one team, we applaud that, right? Like we're in a spot where you shouldn't expect that. So now that almost seems special when a guy decides, no, I'm going to stay here and invest in the program that I originally committed to.
Gracious him. How about that?